Hello, and welcome to QubaHQ Tutorials. I'm Kuba Michalski, and today I'm going to show you how to create a really cool dynamic automated lighting rig. Now, most of the time you will probably want to maintain full control over the lights in your composition. You will want to be able to keyframe their intensity, the color, position, etc. But sometimes you may just want to give your scene an interesting atmosphere using lights and don't really feel like keyframing all those properties. If you find yourself in such situation, well, this rig is for you. The tutorial comes with two presets, Light Rig Light and Light Rig Map, included in a zip file, which I recommend you to install before starting to follow along with what I'm going to be showing you. Once we're done with the lights also, I'm going to show you some really cool technique in particular. Now, when I was developing a demo for this tutorial, I noticed that the standard way of doing smoke with particular produces very strange results, that the particles don't really react to the lights in the way they're supposed to. So I created an alternative setup, which I'm going to explain to you, in which you can create particular smoke that will react to the light's intensity, color, and position in really physically correct way. So let's not waste any more time on the introductions and start the project. Alright, so let's create a really simple scene that we can test our light rig on. I'm going to start with a new composition, call it typically main comp, PAL DV widescreen square pixel, 10 seconds is enough. And this is almost the same procedure as we used in the reflections tutorial, so we're gonna start with the floor 500 by 500 pixels, turn it into 3D layer, rotate it negative 90 degrees, and then do a really quick and dirty camera rig. So camera 1, 35 millimeters, new null object, make it 3D, rename it to dolly, make another copy, parent camera 1 to dolly and dolly to dolly 2. And this way we can control the height of the camera using one null and then the rotation using the other one. So I'm just going to create a very simple animation in here right away, starting from positive and ending on negative 40 degrees. That's just going to give us some quick rotation. Maybe we can ease these two keyframes. This way we don't have to worry about our camera anymore. What we can do though is maybe scale the floor to, let's say, 5000 so that it reaches really far and the lights will definitely fall off before touching the edges of the layer. On top of that, we can add some 3D text, but before we do that, let's add a light so that we can see what's happening. If I add a white text on top of that, we'll see absolutely nothing. So Ctrl-Alt-Shift-L to create a new light. For some reason it's set to red. I don't really care at this point. And let's bring the timeline marker back to 5 seconds. That's exactly in the middle of our movement, so we're facing our layers straight up. I can move the light maybe a bit back and higher up off the ground. Alright, text, QubaHQ, what did you expect? Turn it into 3D layer, place it maybe above the floor, and just using the anchor point I'm gonna bring it up a little bit. I'm not sure if I'm gonna be doing reflections here. Well, maybe I will, so I'm just gonna bring it down and position it in the center of the comp. So just reset the value and that places it right there. Let's just see it down, down, down. All right, this is our fantastic, super complicated scene right now. Okay, maybe bring it up a little bit. Okay, so what I want to have in this scene is some dynamic lights. The lights that don't necessarily move around, but change their color and intensity while still maintaining an overall unified look. I have my bridge open on another window. Here it is. And this is one of the wallpapers that I'm using for my setup, and I kind of like the colors that the sky created in here, so I want to use this image as a reference for my light. Let me just import it, and at the moment it's really huge. I mean, it's 2300 by 1200 and way too big to be used in this comp. I mean, you can, but it would just slow you down. So I'm going to create a new composition, and this is the important part of this tutorial, the naming of the composition. Make sure that you name it properly, otherwise as you apply the presets, everything's gonna break and you're gonna have to manually fix it. So the name of my composition is gonna be light map with capital L and capital M. Alright, so this is my light map. I'm gonna drop the image inside and just navigate to a portion that I like. Maybe I can scale it down a little bit to get a bit wider range. And I want to avoid those boats because they'll just create black areas so the light wouldn't shine. Maybe squeeze it a little bit so that I get more of that sky. And this is looking fairly good. I'm in a wide range of blues, reds, violets, etc. So I'm gonna grab this light map, bring it to my composition, drop it at the bottom of everything. And you can't see it right now, but it is there. And switch it off. And from this point forward is a very simple process, just applying these two presets. But before I do that, I'm just going to create a new solid layer, black color, and create some flares on top so we can better see what's happening to our lights. So why don't we call it flares? And of course I'm going to use Video Copilot's flares because they're quick to render and they look good. Track lights. Right now it's tracking my red light, which is somewhere off the screen. I can move that light in a little bit because as we're turning the camera, we're not gonna see much. So let's just bring it into the scene. Wow, that's bright. Anyway, let's go to options and browser, preset browser. I want to use the same flare I used in the reflections tutorial, and I believe that was blue steel. Yep, that's the one. Only that for the beginning I'm just going to hide all the other elements, leaving just the glow so that we don't have too many visual elements on the screen distracting us from what's really happening. Alright, maybe lower the brightness to 50 and that shows us pretty well what's happening to our light. Of course, set it to screen. Great. So with the flare visualizer in place, let's apply the presets. First, let's select our light map and apply the light rig map preset. That's done. As you can see, it popped up a whole bunch of controls. I'm gonna walk you through them in a moment. And let's go to our light and apply light rig light to it. And you can see it immediately changed the color into a violet, which is one of the colors on that scene. And as I scrub through the timeline, you can see it's getting different colors from the scene. Now, it may look very flickery right now, but don't worry. I thought about it. It's all under control. Let's see what's happening, okay? Right now, this light's name is light 1. And so is the last effect on our light map, light 1. So basically, our light is going to be automatically linked to this effect and grab the position from it. Let me solo this layer so we can see what's happening better. What it does is it follows the sampler point, which is right now here. Let me change maybe the color of this layer to, let's say, brown. Okay, that should make the controllers a little bit better visible. So it basically follows this point on our light map and samples the color from it and applies it to the light. And at the moment we're using automation, so as I scrub through the timeline, you can see that this point is freely traveling around our image. Now don't worry, it's not gonna come out of the boundaries of the image. It's all scripted and put in the expressions, double checked and super protected. So this is going to work. But there is a bit of a problem with our light setup. If I just come back to this scene, you will see that at some points it really very quickly changes the lights from one color to another. Let's just preview this segment in here. You can see a lot of flickering is happening, right? I mean, this is, unless you're doing some techno video clip, not necessarily the result you want to get. Why is it happening? Our light map is just a bitmap. And as our sampler is traveling through the bands on this image, it samples a lot of different colors. So you can see that in here we have a bright color next to dark color, then again a bright one, and this is exactly what's happening. Those colors are getting sampled and result in flicker. Bright light, dark light, red, pink, etc. So how to remedy this situation is very simple. Basically, you can increase the sample radius. Our sampler works in exactly the same way as the Photoshop's eyedropper tool. At the moment, our sample radius is 1 pixel, so it just samples a single pixel in there. But as I increase the radius to, let's say, 20, it doesn't visualize it, but it will sample a grid of 20 by 20 pixels around that point and find the average color. So it's kind of similar to applying a mosaic filter on top of that, or blurring it. If I switch it off right now and preview the same segment, you can see that we still have some variety happening, but it's quite less dramatic. Now, I'm not sure if it shows well on the tutorial video because the frame rate is much lower. Just to make my point clear, let's just bump it up to 150, and you'll see that right now there's almost no change in the light because the sample region is so huge that the movement of the point on the image is negligible. Let's switch it back to, let's say, 30, and that should at the same time, yes, show us what's happening, the change in the color, but eliminate that flicker. Okay, maybe 40. An alternative to that would be to just blur our image on the light map composition. Let's go through the settings and see what's happening here. So first of all, we have this automate with a question mark, and what that does is basically lets us decide, do we want to animate our sampler by hand, or do we want to use wiggle expression to let it freely travel around the image? Right now it's sitting somewhere there. If I turn off the automate, it will jump to the left top corner and let me set the position manually. I can use it in two different ways. I can either actually three different ways. I can leave it where it is and just sample a single color. I can keyframe it and animate it through the colors the way I want them to go. Or I can either leave it or animate it, but at the same time change the graphic. So right now our image is static, but it could be a movie, or this picture could be moving through. I mean, we can actually do it really quickly. If I open the light map and just apply two quick keyframes here, so position here and move it through. Let's get back to main comp. You will now see that our image is moving. So although the sampler point is in the same spot, it's sampling different colors. If I look at my light, it is indeed changing the color following the sampler. Now, I don't really want that to happen right now. I'm gonna keep it automated, so let's remove that position change. The spot is still fine here, and let's turn on the automate back on. Second setting is the light boost, and that's basically for the images that are either too bright or too dark. By default I'm setting it at 5, but if you push it up, your light will become that much stronger relative to the color it samples, and if I push it down, it will become darker. And I think it goes until -10 and then fades to black. Let's bring it back to the default of 5. Wiggle frequency controls how quickly the sampler point is moving through our light map. And by default it's 1, but I'm gonna switch it to half, so it's gonna assume new position every 2 seconds. And I think that's going to again result in much smoother color transitions. And finally, the sample radius, which I already told you about. So the higher it is, the more we're blurring our source and the less flickering will happen. You may ask me, why do we have the sample radius? Why not just make it high from the beginning? Well, some images may have a lot of changes in them, some may not. What I often do using this rig, and I did that in the demo, is basically create a gradient on my map, and in there I have smoothest possible transition between the colors, and I can just sample a single pixel at each time, still getting no flickers. When you're working with images though, it's probably better to run it with the sample radius of 30 or above. So this rig already simplified our workflow a lot. I mean, imagine just having to sample that image multiple times and keyframe the color of your light in different positions in time, etc. But what's really cool is how easy it is to add multiple lights to it. And what I can do right now is go to my light map, and you can see I have this light 1, and I'll just duplicate it 4 3 times to create 4 lights total, and then duplicate my light 3 times, 1, 2, 3. Okay, and now each of those lights has its own sampler point, and if I move them around, you will see how each of them gets a little bit different color. At this point they actually all look identical, but there we go. You see one of them is pink, another is brighter, another is more violet, etc. And the whole thing works beautifully. Now I can immediately see that they are way off the center of the comp. Let's go to 5 seconds, yeah. In here they should be in front of the picture. Maybe bring one of them a little bit lower. And yeah, as I scrap through the time, you can see they're all sampling their own colors, nicely changing the lighting of the scene. But of course right now the whole thing is totally blown up. I mean, this is really bright, the text is completely white. So first of all I can switch it to 32 bits and I can already see that this is way too intense. So to counter that, simply go to your light map, go to the effect controls and lower the light boost. So as we bring it down to -2, maybe to 0 actually. Yep, we're getting much nicer results. So basically, the more lights you have in your scene, the lower the light boost would be. I mean, even right now, you can see that at some points it's blowing it up a bit too much. So maybe that -2 was a good idea. Yeah, and this looks much better. So I mean, additionally to that, you can add the wiggle to your lights, you can move them around, etc. But this is the light rig in a nutshell. If you don't like expressions and if you don't like complexity, I recommend you right now fast forward this tutorial until the point we're going to be dealing with the smoke, because right now I'm going to dissect and explain how does the light rig work and let you understand the expressions so that you can modify them to your own needs. So of course, double-clicking the light rig map applies all these effects on the light map. And most of them are really simple. So automatic is a simple checkbox. It does not link anywhere. It's only producing a result. Same thing with light boost, wiggle frequency, and sample radius. Light 1 is the first place where we encounter some expressions. If I unroll it in here, so let's go to the effects. Actually, I can get rid of the other lights from the scene. I mean, we don't need it. Let's get rid of other effects as well and bring the boost back to 5. So light 1 has only one property, which is the point or position, but it has some expression going on in there. Let's have a look what's happening. This is the light rig map sampler expression from here to here, and what it does is this. First of all, it checks if the automate is on or off. If it is off, it simply returns the value. So basically, whatever keyframe or position you set for it, it will return that, and the rest of expression will be ignored. If the automate is on, however, it starts calculating. So first of all, it assigns the values of X and Y, measuring how big is our map. So it takes the size of the layer and divides it by 2, basically to find where is the center point. Second of all, it checks what's the frequency of our wiggle. So that's basically a link to this wiggle frequency. And then assigns separate wiggles to both the X and Y. Now, our map right now is 500 by 500 pixels, so it wouldn't matter if they were both identical. But you can use any map size. It can be, 1000 pixels wide and 3 pixels tall. In that case, a typical wiggle would result in the point coming out of the screen. But if we wiggle the X and Y properties separately, it's going to keep it in bounds. Now, you can't wiggle a value that you assign automatically. So you cannot say, okay, my value is 0, 0, and then I'm gonna wiggle it. No, the value is a value, and whatever keyframes may be on the property will stay there. So because of that, there is a little bit of craziness happening here calculating the results. So First, I take these two wiggles, horizontal and vertical. Then I have to subtract the value itself, so whatever offset may be there due to the keyframes, and then add X and Y, which pushes it towards the center of the screen. Now, I don't know if it makes any sense, but basically, these expressions make sure that our wiggle becomes relative to the center of the composition. The second thing is the margin effect, and that basically checks what's the sample radius, how big our sampling zone is, and pushes sampler away from the edges. I had this problem early when creating this effect, that sometimes suddenly brightness of my light would become very low. It would become really dark, and that would generally happen when the sampler point, let's see if we have any spot like that in here. Well, luckily not right now, but sometimes the sampler point would come very close to the edge, and if it's on the last pixel of the edge and our sample zone is, let's say, 50 pixels, it would sample half of them from the image and half of them from the black, effectively making the whole thing much darker. So of course it doesn't come to the edge right now because I already have that expression in effect. But basically what it does is it makes sure that our sampler is pushed away from the edge by whatever amount we set in our sample radius. So you can see that if I increase our sample radius to, let's say, 200 and come back, it right now pushed our point much closer to the center. If I set it at 0, let's see, it brought it closer to the end, of course, and I broke the expression. Well, the sample radius cannot be 0. It has to be sampling something, it can't be sampling nothing. Anyway, so when it's at 0, it has a free range of movement around the canvas, and the higher it gets, the larger the margin becomes. Let me see if it's still working. No, it's not, of course. Let's reinitialize the expressions in here. So color and intensity. Okay, we got it back. Where were we? So that margin basically takes care of the point not coming too close to the edge and not getting any black color affecting our sample color. And then this is looking really terrible. I mean, I'm pretty sure there is a more elegant way of writing this code. I'm not a coder myself. I simply like automating some tasks, so this is the best I came up with. Basically, I'm using the linear function to make sure that my point never exits the screen. And originally, I always thought that wiggle would basically move the point to left and right, top and down, maximum the amount that is specified in the instruction. Apparently, that's not the case. I've been informed by Mr. Dan Eberts himself, who's pretty much as much of an After Effects expressions guru as one can get, that wiggle sometimes tends to exceed its maximum value. So basically this linear is a clamp that makes sure that we stay within our specified parameters and again never exit that image and start sampling black color. So that's what's happening on the sampler point. On the light we have two properties that have expressions on them, color and intensity. Let's start with color, because intensity is actually only a variation of the color. First of all, we define some variables. We pick up the name of the layer or the name of the light we're working with, and this is what allows us to connect light 1 to the point called light 1, etc. Then we specify the target layer. By default, that's the light map, the name that I told you about when we were creating a new composition. Now, once you apply it, you can change it to whatever you want and the expressions will update themselves. But initially, you should keep that name when you're creating the map. Next thing is a new function called sample point. And basically that says take our target layer, which is our light map, and find the effect called whatever our light is called and the point on it. Okay, this does not make any sense whatsoever. Okay, let me try again. Sample point basically figures out where is our sampler positioned at that moment. So it grabs the target layer based on our target name and target layer and grabs the effect and reads the position of the point. Oh man. Then it also reads the sample radius, and then it samples the layer. Well, it's really not that complicated. I think I could have written it in one line, but because I split it into several lines, it's much easier to adjust. So if you don't want certain elements of the automation, you can just delete a single line or modify it, etc. The sample image method basically grabs our sample point, which is wherever that little sampler travels around, and reads the color or reads the range of colors using the sample radius. All right, enough. Next. Finally, we have the light rig intensity, and it starts the same way. All these four first lines are identical, and the fifth is almost the same, but instead of returning this value, it assigns it to RGB. And from RGB, we convert it to HSL, hue, saturation, and lightness, and then grab the lightness, modify the sampled lightness, and result in the light's intensity. Yeah, I mean, feel free to analyze these expressions at your own discretion. They may not be written in the best possible way, but I think they do what they're asked for, and that's what matters for me at this point. Now, just so that we don't have to stare at the pink color for the rest of this tutorial, let me quickly switch our light map. I'm gonna remove that image from there, create a new solid, and just apply a 4-color gradient on it. And maybe change the pink into orange, because this transition didn't work very well when I originally did the demo. So let's switch this to kind of bright orange, and maybe the blue into more of a baby blue. And as you can see right now, we don't have any sharp edges. So when we go to our main comp, we can also get rid of that sample radius being so high. We can bring it back to 1, and there will be no flickering whatsoever. Alright, so we have one light. Let's create 2 more. So first, duplicate samplers. Now this is very important that you do the samplers first, because if you simply create a new light by duplicating the existing one, it will read its name. Let's say, let's create 1 too many. Boom! Yes, it creates errors because it reads its name, which is light 4. And it looks at our light map for the effect called light 4, which is not present there, and results in an error. If you create the effect first and then the new light, everything is gonna work fine, and you don't have to go there and reinitialize them. Anyway, I'm just gonna switch it off. Actually, let's delete these lights for a moment and just apply some wiggle on the position of this thing. So I'm gonna come to the center and make sure that my light is relatively positioned in the center as well. So that would be 512. 100 is a good height, and minus 500, let's say, and add a bit wiggle to it so it moves around. So wiggle, let's say, every 2 seconds by 300 pixels. Would that be high enough? I just need to bring it up a little bit, the original value, so that it doesn't clip the floor. Okay. And right now our light is happily flying around, and I can now make 2 more copies, and we can't see them because they are somewhere high in the air apparently. So let's bring them down again. Wow, they're all the way there. Okay, I'm just trying to figure it out. Our original floor position is 288. We're wiggling by 300. Okay, maybe we can just lower the wiggle. So let's bring it back up to, let's say, 0. Again, I can delete the other lights and just copy them so I don't have to redo it 3 times. And wiggle it by just 100 maybe. So 0.5, 100. 288. I can set it at 50. Is the light ever coming into the scene? Yes, it is. Make a copy. Move it to the left. Make a copy. Move it to the right. Alright, so that creates just 3 lights that are randomly flying around and changing the colors. And you can see how much smoother this became once I applied a gradient to our map rather than an image. And of course, again, it's totally blowing the lights out of proportion, so we need to lower the boost. So light map, light boost, let's try 0. And this is looking fairly good, I think. Yep. Alright, so with all the lighting in place, let's create that crazy smoke. So of all things, I can actually use yet another light to produce my particles. I just have to make sure that neither the lighting rig nor the flares are affected by that light. So what I'm gonna do is first I'll go to flares and make sure that I'm switching the name starts with light on for this, so it will ignore any lights with other names. Then I'm gonna create a new light, point, make it white because I want the particles to be white, and call it emitter. And of course I forgot to set the intensity. I want that to be 0, so it does not do any lighting to the scene. Now let's find a good position for it. First of all, I'm going to bring it to the middle, so that's gonna be 288 and 0, and that should sit exactly where QubaHQ is. Then I'll bring it, let's say, 250 pixels in front and 250 pixels up. That puts it a bit up in the air, but we'll adjust that in a moment. And then apply a wiggle to it as well. So wiggle 1,230, let's say. So we make sure it doesn't go through the floor. So that's our emitter, right? Let's see if it's flying around. Yes, it is. We can also change our camera tilt so that we can see all this stuff a little bit better. Let's just bring it closer to the ground a little and maybe move the whole thing back. So, okay, that should work. And let's create a particular layer that's going to produce our smoke. So Ctrl Y, black solid, calling it particular. It can sit on top of everything. Effect, Trapcode Particular. And of course this is completely not what we want, so let's do the settings really quickly. First of all, emitter type will be light. And let's see, is it doing anything? Not really, not at this point at least. Particles per second should not be read from the light intensity, so I'm setting it to none. Now we have the thing producing particles. I'm just going to set velocity and all the randomness and everything at 0 right now, so we can see it a little bit better. And I think this could be a good spot to modify the properties. So first of all, I'm going to do it a pretty much standard way of creating smoke and show you what doesn't work with it, and then show you my runaround about this problem. We have the producer. Let's switch the particle type to cloudlet, increase the size to maybe 20 pixels, maybe 15. 20 could be a bit ostentatious. Size random by, let's say, 30%, no more. And of course the opacity has to go way down, maybe to 20, maybe to even 10, with the variation of, let's say, 25%. We can create a little bit of a ramping for the size and opacity. So let's set size over life to ramp up smoothly. This is a bit too slow. Let's redraw that ramp. Now this is my only problem with Particular, is that even with the version 2 they still didn't modify the engine for making those ramps. It would be really nice if we could have it in a nice vector format. So anyway, so this is our ramp for size over life, and then opacity over life is just going to be a soft ramp. So let's see. This is looking good, right? And we can also maybe increase the amount of particles to, let's say, 300, which will force us to lower the opacity a bit further to maybe 5. All right. So this is looking, let's say, okay-ish. One thing more I can do is take my second dolly and just bring it up a little bit. So we're looking more at what's happening in the scene rather than just having half of the screen filled with the floor. So right now the particles are not reacting to the lights, and they will not unless you have the Particular version 2. Fortunately, that's what we're working with in here, so let's set it up. Shading. Let's open shading, turn the shading on, and you can immediately see that we're starting to get some sort of reaction from the lights. Right now we're set to light fall off natural lags, which means each light has a certain radius around it that it will illuminate the particles within, and any particles that fall further than that will be rendered as black. I'm gonna switch it to none, and this way the light loses its fall off. This may look like it's already done and it's working and it's grabbing the lights, etc. But if I take any of those lights and start moving it around, you can see that there isn't really any change happening to my particles, and they should be reacting to the light's changing position. And that's because right now we're working with the default particle type, and although it reads the lights, it doesn't really do a very good job applying them to the geometry. So what we need to do is switch our particle type to either, where do we have it? To either textured polygon or sprite. Now textured polygon will work very well if your camera is always looking in the same direction. Since we have a rotation built in the scene, let's use the sprite. At the moment we don't have any sprite, and that's what we need to create. So I'm gonna go to project, create one more composition, set it at 250 by 250 and call it sprites. Inside I will create a new black solid and apply another copy of Particular to it. So effect, Trapcode Particular, which is just off the edge of the recording space. And of course by default it looks nothing like what we wanted to, but this will change in just a moment. Emitter in here is a point, it's in the center, that's all good, but what I want to do is emit 25 particles per second. And 25, that's my frame rate. If you're working in NTSC, you can set it to 30 or 2997, whatever is your current composition frame rate. I'm setting it to 25, so it will emit one particle each frame. I'll also set the particle life to be 1 divided by 25, and that results in 0,04. So each particle only lives for one frame as well. I'll also want to remove all velocity properties, so the particles always stay in the center, and boost up the size of them. So let's push it up a little bit. And now it doesn't look like much, but that's because our particle type is sphere. Let's set it to cloudlet and lower its opacity, so it's not just a ugly white blob, but actually has some detail in it. So we'll go to opacity, switch it to, let's say, 20. Does a fairly good job, and then play with the size until we get the cloudlet that does not clip with the edge of the comp in here. So right now, where's the particle size? It's right here. 82 is too big. Let's see, 50 or 60. And you can see that on each frame it emits a separate particle. Now, I couldn't yet figure out what's happening here. It only starts emitting particles around frame 1 minute and 1 second and 8 frames, and before that it just emits a few of them and stops. It's something I encountered also when doing a demo, and I couldn't quite figure out why. After that it generates 1 particle per frame beautifully, but in the beginning it inserts that empty spot. Anyway, I think we could feather them a little bit more to make it a little bit more cloudy. And this is starting to look pretty good. I may increase the size a little bit more to, let's say, 80. And at that point, most of the particles will look really nice, but some of them will clip through the edge. And since we don't want to have any sharp angles in our particles, let's create a matte for it. So I'm gonna do a new layer on top, apply a mask to it, switch the mode to stencil alpha, feather the mask a little bit. So as I feather it, you can see that we're getting rid of any clipping that was happening around the edge, and all our particles are nice and smooth. And second thing that we need to do is basically figure out where is that spot where it starts generating particles, and yes, 108 for whatever reason. clip the layer. I'm using Alt and left square bracket, and then Alt Home, bring it to the beginning and extend it to the rest of the comp. So right now we have one particle per frame, each of them random, and we can use that as a sprite. Let's get back to our main comp and modify our particle simulation to use the freshly created sprite. So the first thing we need to do is bring that sprite in. It's called sprites, drop it at the bottom, turn off its visibility. We don't want any flickering graphics in the background. And then in particular properties, let's set it up. So our particle type will be sprite, and texture will be our sprites layer. And that already brings it back, but it's still looking really ugly. If I increase the size right now to, let's say, 30, you'll see that it doesn't look like much. And that's because we're emitting several particles per second. Actually, not several, probably around 100 or 500. And the sampling is using current time. So it's using only 25 different sprites each second. So what we need to do is switch it to random still frame. And basically this way it will calculate a little bit longer. But for each newborn particle, it will grab a different frame from our sprites composition. Second thing is we already lowered the opacity inside of the sprites, so we can bring it back up in here. Let's see at what level does it become pleasant to the eye. Let's try 20. It's a bit too thick for my taste. Let's try 15. 15 is looking kinda okay. And why don't we preview this thing and just see what happens in here right now. So we can see our null is traveling around the scene, producing random smoky particles. And this is actually a good example. Look at this light. As it comes really close to our particle simulation, it really blows bright in here. It really becomes quite lit up. And right now, the light is traveling away and we're starting to lose that color on the particles. Let's just scrap through the timeline to look at this effect in a couple of different spots. Unfortunately, the render times are slowing down significantly, but we can see that the reaction is much stronger and the light is really changing accordingly to our lights. I mean, just to show you that that's the case, let's grab this light and move it around. Boy, is it slow. You can see as I move it behind, right now the whole thing becomes kind of brownish. When I move it in front, it becomes much more lit up. And as I move it around, you can see how the light on the whole particle setup changes in accordance to my light's position. So that's kind of the proof of the concept. Now, I mean, if you really want to play with this composition, we could create some sort of drift to it. So maybe increase the initial velocity to 20. It's becoming a bit more cloudy, maybe 10 with a 25 randomness. Velocity distribution at, let's say, 1, and velocity from motion at 15. And just for the preview purposes, let's lower the amount of particle, well, not to 10, maybe 100, just to see if the smoke became a bit more dynamic right now. And yes, right now it's grabbing the velocity of our light, so the smoke particles are not just created in one spot, but they move together with the light and slowly lose their tempo and then dissipate into the air. Okay, so this is working out, and basically I think we're nearing the end of this tutorial, because there isn't really that many things I can cover from this point onwards. I mean, in my original setup, I think I had around 1,000 particles per second at much lower opacity, and I'm going to bring it back to 300. And then I use the reflection trick, which is basically duplicating the main comp and parenting the dolly 2 into the floor, flipping the floor, and creating perfect reflections. I mean, if you want to know more about creating the reflections, check out the previous tutorial on QubaHQ. or you can dissect the project demo file, which I'm also including apart from this project file that we're working on right now. I'm guessing that's it. I really can't think of anything else I could show you with this light rig. Keep in mind, you can either let it automate everything or maintain manual control. You can use images or animations as the source. If you have too much flicker happening, you can either blur your source or increase the sample radius. And I hope it will serve you well. For QubaHQ, I'm Kuba Michalski, and I have nothing else to say. See you next time.